You're listening to Scientific Giants Who Changed the World. Each episode stands beside one mind and follows a thread of curiosity until it ties to the world we inhabit. Today, we enter an era when summer itself became terrifying. Swimming pools closed, parents watched their children with a new kind of dread. Newspapers counted cases like war reports. The enemy was polio, an illness that could strike quickly, paralyze permanently, and sometimes kill by suffocation. And the man who helped break that terror, not with a miracle in a single moment, but with stubborn method and moral clarity, was Jonas Salk. Jonas Salk was born in 1914 in New York City to immigrant parents who wanted their children to climb into a world education could unlock. Salk was bright, serious, and driven by a quiet ambition that wasn't about fame so much as usefulness. He entered medicine with a clear preference. He did not want to be a physician in the romantic sense of bedside heroics. He wanted to stop disease at the source. He wanted prevention. By the time Salk trained as a medical researcher, polio had become one of the most feared diseases in the United States and elsewhere. Polio outbreaks surged in waves, especially in the first half of the 20th century. The disease struck mostly children, but not only children. It could begin like a flu, fever, sore throat, fatigue, and then, in some cases, invade the nervous system, damaging motor neurons. Muscles weakened, limbs withered. Some patients lost the ability to breathe and were placed into iron lungs, large metal machines that mechanically expanded and contracted the chest. The image of rows of iron lungs became one of the most haunting symbols of the era. The fear wasn't only the disease itself, it was the randomness. Polio did not always strike the poorest or those in obvious conditions of neglect. It could strike any family. This fact created a kind of democratic terror, and it fueled a massive public demand for a solution. To understand Salk's approach, you have to understand a core scientific debate of the time. What kind of vaccine would work? There were two broad strategies. One was a live attenuated vaccine, using a weakened form of the virus that could replicate in the body without causing serious disease, provoking strong immunity. The other was an inactivated vaccine, using virus that had been killed, so it could not replicate, but could still train the immune system to recognize it. Live vaccines were powerful, but they carried risk. If the virus reverted or if attenuation was incomplete, the vaccine could cause disease. Inactivated vaccines were considered safer, but many doubted whether a killed virus could produce robust and lasting immunity. Salk favored the inactivated approach. Part of this was scientific reasoning, but part of it was temperament. Salk was cautious about playing roulette with a virus that could cripple. He believed you could make an effective vaccine without asking the body to host a living pathogen. His job became proving it. Salk worked at the University of Pittsburgh, where he and his team developed methods to grow poliovirus in large quantities and then inactivate it using formaldehyde. The challenge was delicate. The virus needed to be fully inactivated, completely unable to infect, while still retaining the structures the immune system needed to recognize. Too much inactivation, and the vaccine would be useless. Too little, and it would be dangerous. This is where the story becomes both technical and moral, because the technical decisions carried human consequences. Salk's vaccine was not simply an idea, it was a promise to families. If it failed, the cost could be measured in paralysis. Early tests were done on animals, and then cautiously on humans. Salk and his team tested on small groups, including, famously, on themselves and their families. This kind of self-testing is often mythologized, but in context, it reflects the weight of responsibility. If you ask the public to trust a vaccine, the first trust you need is your own. The real turning point came with the largest public health experiment of its time, the 1954 field trial of the Salk polio vaccine. It involved over 1 million children in the United States, some vaccinated, some given placebo, some observed controls. It was massive, logistically complex, and emotionally intense. Schools became clinical sites. Parents signed forms with trembling hands. Communities argued, hoped, and watched. When the results were announced in April 1955, the relief was immediate and visceral. The vaccine worked. It was highly effective in preventing paralytic polio. Church bells rang, newspapers celebrated. For a moment, modern science felt like salvation made real. But the story didn't end with triumph. A crisis followed almost immediately. The Cutter incident. A manufacturer, Cutter Laboratories, produced vaccine batches in which inactivation was incomplete. Some children received vaccine containing live poliovirus. This caused cases of polio, including paralysis and death, and it shook public confidence. The incident became a major lesson in quality control, regulation, and the unforgiving standards required when biology becomes mass production. Salk's vaccine itself was not the villain. The manufacturing failure was. But it revealed a hard truth. When you scale medicine to millions, the weakest link becomes public tragedy. The response to the Cutter incident led to stronger vaccine oversight and helped shape modern regulatory practices. Over time, polio cases dropped dramatically in countries using vaccination. Later, Albert Sabin's oral live attenuated vaccine became widely used because it was easier to administer and produced strong intestinal immunity, helping interrupt transmission. In many places, Sabin's vaccine dominated polio eradication campaigns. Yet Salk's work remains foundational. He proved that an inactivated virus could protect. He built a bridge from fear to control. Now we reach the moral question that made Salk more than a scientist in the public imagination: the patent. When asked in a television interview who owned the patent to the vaccine, Salk replied, "Well, the people, I would say. There is no patent." The line became famous because it cut through an era of rising biomedical industry and asked something simple and sharp. If you create a tool that saves children, should it be owned like a product or held like a public good? Salk did not become a saint. He was human. He could be ambitious, sensitive to criticism, and frustrated when credit shifted. He had rivals. He navigated politics. But on the patent question, his stance was clear, and it carved a lasting symbol into public memory. In an age when medicine increasingly intersects with profit, Salk's choice stands out as a moral statement embedded in scientific achievement. This is not a simple issue. Developing vaccines requires money, infrastructure, and incentives. Yet Salk's position reminds us that scientific progress is not only about what we can do, it's also about what we decide to do with what we can do. The vaccine was not only a technological object, it was a social decision. Salk later founded the Salk Institute in California, a place designed to support scientific research at a high level, driven by curiosity and public purpose. The institute became an intellectual landmark, attracting brilliant minds across biology and beyond. In a way, Salk tried to build an environment where science could remain oriented toward the human future, rather than only toward market logic. So how should we remember Jonas Salk? We should remember him as the man who confronted polio not with a romantic myth of lone genius, but with method, scale, and responsibility. He built an inactivated vaccine that could be tested, proven, and distributed. He accepted the risk of public scrutiny and the weight of public hope. He also forced a moral question into the center of the story, reminding the world that a cure is not only a scientific achievement, it is a social promise. We should remember, too, the era that made Salk necessary: the iron lungs, the closed pools, the parental fear, and how quickly that fear shifted when a vaccine worked. It shows what medicine can do when it aligns research, public funding, infrastructure, and collective will. If you want a final image, picture a classroom of children lining up in 1954 for shots. Teachers trying to be calm. Parents outside pretending not to be afraid. Picture the announcement a year later, the sudden feeling that the future might be safer than the past. Then picture Salk, asked about ownership, refusing the language of possession, and offering instead a cosmic metaphor: "You do not patent sunlight." You have been listening to Scientific Giants Who Changed the World. Today we followed Jonas Salk from a crowded world of polio fear to a vaccine that broke its dominance, from laboratory inactivation to public trials, from scientific victory to a moral question about ownership. In our next episode, we will meet Santiago Ramon y Cajal, who stared into nervous tissue long enough to redraw the brain. Not as a continuous net, but as a forest of individual neurons, each one a living unit in a larger mind. Until then, thank you for your attention and your time. This episode was written as a continuous story for the ear, because the polio vaccine is not just a breakthrough. It is a chapter in the story of what a society becomes when it decides that prevention, not just treatment, is worth fighting for.